a word called fracking, and I don't know what that really means. And I had no idea when we discussed this that that word was ever in existence. So I'm going to introduce you to her, and we're going to ask her questions about water supply, what fracking is, and what that means to you. Hi, Christina.
Rothberg, how are you?
I'm okay, I hope. How did you start getting interested in environmental issues anyway?
Well, I have taken classes through school, but on my own, I've always thought it was so important to teach yourself about what goes on in our world. Unfortunately, a lot of issues that go on, we have to educate ourselves. So on my own, I've always taught myself, but I had the privilege to work with some environmental groups this summer where I learned so much, and the more that I learned, the more I got involved, the more I cared, because I realized just how much is going on in our world, and it is up to us to speak up about it.
Now that's very interesting, because there are a lot of environmental issues that are being brought to the focus at this time. Now, what environmental areas are you most interested in? So thereby you can look at it as a mission and a passion. What do you think?
Well, that's a great question. I'm not a scientist, I am an activist, so I don't necessarily think that there's one environmental issue that is more important than another. I am pro-recycling and all for organic farming, but there has been a terrible gas drilling process that has been brought to my attention that can contaminate our water and our air.
Contamination is a very important word. Now, that is a big umbrella. It could mean bacterial, it could mean viral, it could mean chemical. Now, the question is, what environmental areas can you talk about that is part of the water pollution that concerns you?
Well, not only are humans, we're all made up of mostly water, but we're constantly in contact with water throughout the day. We need water for our survival. So we drink water, we wash our fruits and our vegetables with water, we cook with water, we shower and brush our teeth. We hope everyone's washing their hands throughout the day with water. So you want this water that you're constantly in contact with to be clean, not toxic.
That is a very important word, toxicity. Toxic can mean, in an umbrella, again, bacterial, it could be viral, it could be chemical. Now, what else, what do you think contaminates water more so than the ones I've already mentioned?
Unfortunately, there are a lot of different ways that our water is contaminated, more than I could name. But there is the issues of flushing prescription drugs. There's the issue of spraying pesticides that can seep into our aquifer systems. But there is a very dangerous gas drilling process that can contaminate our drinking water.
Well, that would mean that something is going to be happening that would allow more toxicity in the waters that are already there. So the question is, what is this gas drilling that you're talking about? What is it called, and what happens?
The full term is high volume horizontal hydraulic fracturing. It's better known as, for short, as fracking or hydrofracking.
Well, then we have to understand to explain what it is. Can you give us the process of what that actually means? Because there are certain states in the United States, I believe Dakota is one of them, either south or north, that has already involved itself with this process. And they are doing economically very well. But we're not talking about economics right now. We're talking about, shall we say, toxicity. What is that gas drilling? What is it? Explain, please, what it would mean to all of us here in New York State.
Yes, Doctor, you're actually right. Out west, several states have started fracking. This process, to sum it up, basically, it's as a means to extract natural gas. What they do is they drill downward into the ground, then they also drill horizontally into Marseille shale rock formations. They pump fracking fluid into the ground. Fracking fluid is basically just a toxic cocktail of industrial chemicals that are pumped into the ground, and they break up these rock formations. They fracture the rock, which releases the natural gas so they can extract it.
As I recall in my Science 101 classes, that what is in the rock is shale. Now, shale has natural gas in it. As a matter of fact, they were talking about using that natural gas in shale as a possible substitute for gasoline for the cars. So I'm wondering, how is water involved in that process where releasing that gas will make it toxic?
Yes, well, as everyone knows, Long Island, we have an aquifer system, but all over there's natural aquifers and water tables. When they frack, they drill below, right into the water tables. So therefore, these chemicals that are being pumped into the ground when they're drilling these wells can leak into the water and contaminate the water supply.
Okay, what kind of chemicals are actually involved in fracking? Because if that is true, then we need to, if necessary, evolve along with that with certain kinds of, shall we say, filters that can filter out these particular chemicals that are negative to and create toxicity in our bodies. So, what kind of chemicals are actually involved in fracking?
Well, there's over 750 toxic chemicals in fracking fluid. Some of these chemicals are neurotoxins and endocrine disruptors, which are directly linked to causing neurological and cognitive disorders. Some of these chemicals are toxic metals. There's traces of arsenic. There's traces of methane, which why in Pennsylvania they've seen things like flammable tap water. Some of these chemicals are radioactive, like radium, uranium. Now, children that are still developing or pregnant women are coming into contact with these chemicals from showering or brushing their teeth. They're drinking this water that's been contaminated. Now, there are even carcinogens that are in fracking fluid that can go into the water. Carcinogens like formaldehyde, which people know formaldehyde is being used for embalming.
It is frightening to know. Some of us don't know anything about fracking. I plead to be one of them as someone ignorant. However, the way in which, Christina, you are explaining, it is very important that the traces of arsenic and toxic metals and formaldehyde become cumulative in the human bloodstream, and in this way are thinking again about the human brain. They are detrimental to the development of the brain in the early stages of development, and at the same time, they can be very detrimental and destructive. Okay, watch the word destructive, regarding elderly people and how that can be something that can be very difficult as far as holding a balance of the brain neurons. So my question then to you would be, how many carcinogens do they actually know that there are in fracking fluids?
That's a great question. There's over 600 known carcinogens in fracking fluid, such as benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene. Now, some of these carcinogens can't even be used on lab rats, but they're being allowed to possibly contaminate drinking water. People know that carcinogens are directly linked to cancer, possibly liver and kidney damage. Now, there's been studies that are showing the increase in rates of breast cancer in women that are living in a certain radius of these fracking zones because they're being exposed to these carcinogens. And people could wonder, how is that possible that you're allowed to be in contact with these chemicals, that this is even allowed to be put into the water? When in 2005, during the Bush administration, when Cheney was in office, he revised the Safe Drinking Water Act. He gave Halliburton an exemption. It's known as the Halliburton loophole. Halliburton has exclusive permission to inject these chemicals into the ground, where they could possibly go into the drinking water. Now, that's unhealthy, but that's also a conflict of interest because he needs to be CEO at Halliburton.
All of this is very interesting, and it is surprising that the public was never informed of any of this. What is surprising is that in the lack of informing of this, thereby it has become a very interesting, shall we say, issue. But yet at the same time, it was never publicized at all, because I read the newspapers every day, especially the Wall Street Journal, and none of the captions ever mentioned anything about this at all. So this is a very big surprise when it comes to journalism. Journalism is supposed to be important in certainly portraying public issues. And the fact that it was not in any of the newspapers is a journalism defect. That's something we have to think about. Now, why don't you tell us, where are the gas companies? Where are they, and who are the gas companies proposing to do the fracking?
Well, they frack on Marcel Shale rock formations. So if this is allowed in New York State, that would be upstate New York, which is where the Marcel Shale rock formations are in New York. Now, that would directly affect New York City's water supply, but that's also where several popular bottled water companies bottle their water bottles at that source. That's water that everyone drinks.
So then all the quote-unquote natural spring waters that come from that area will not be natural any longer. They will be, shall we say, use the word contaminated, or shall we say, we can also use the word manipulated into being different from the water supply that we have now. Very interesting. Now, how does this fracking fluid get disposed of? How do we get rid of it? Once those chemicals are in the water supply, how then will it be filtered out?
There are different disposal processes. They can dump these hundreds of thousands of excess waste fracking fluid into open fields to just let it evaporate into our air. They could send it to water treatment plants, but that's overwhelming for a water treatment plant because they can't weave out all of those radioactive chemicals, but that also puts the public's water supply directly in contact and contamination. There are also disposal water wells. Now, that's an out-of-sight, out-of-mind process. They just re-inject these chemicals back into the ground.
Now, by re-injecting these chemicals back into the ground, doesn't that then cyclically, watch the word cycle, doesn't that then affect the environment in a very negative way? Because if those chemicals are then put back into the water, the question here is, then how then it goes back into the water, which is back into the rock, and then back into the rock that then will be, shall we say, redone, and gas coming out from there further? Is that the truth?
Well, by re-injecting the disposal of the chemicals back into the ground, that can disrupt fault lines. So in some areas, like Youngstown, Ohio, and other areas, where they have never seen natural disasters like earthquakes before, now they are, because these chemicals can disrupt fault lines.
Wow. Did we ever think about the fault lines? We have fault lines here in New York State. And I'm wondering whether or not this New York State situation having to do with the fault lines will cause earthquakes here. That's pretty amazing. We really need to think that through, because it's very, very important. Now, can the disposal process cause any difficulties in our Earth besides just earthquakes?
Yes, and after Hurricane Sandy, the last thing that New York needs is another natural disaster.
Now, the question is, if there are natural disasters similar to Hurricane Sandy, how does fracking affect the entire climate?
There are methane emissions that escape from the fracking wells. Now, methane is a very potent greenhouse gas. It's a lot stronger than carbon dioxide. So that would definitely fuel climate change and global warming.
Very interesting, because see what happens in this area here goes up into the jet stream, okay, and that follows around the Earth as a planet, okay, which then affects, looking at Antarctica, and I've been there twice, it also affects that particular seventh continent, where, if that is true, hundreds of gallons, or shall we say millions of gallons of water then are affected by and cause more climatic changes, according to Al Gore's theory of global warming. So the next thing is, what other extreme side effects should people be aware of?
That's a great question. The release of methane emissions also is very dangerous for respiratory systems. By breathing in that gas, it can cause respiratory problems. So children that are growing up in fracking zones are more likely to develop asthma. Now, there's also 24-hour noise pollution from a fracking well. I talked about the raising rates of stillbirths in humans, but that also unfortunately goes for cattle. Cows are having stillbirths and toxic milk. So you can imagine, if hydrofracking is allowed in New York State, how that would dramatically affect New York's agriculture. So that goes for farmers, that goes for fishermen. It's also debatable that hydrofracking would create new jobs. But in actuality, these jobs would be temporary, non-union, and that's putting these workers at risk for getting sick. Now, if we were to switch to renewable resources, that would create tens and thousands of jobs for New Yorkers.
So you see, a lot of political stuff and economic stuff go into the decision on whether we should do fracking in New York State or not, okay? Now, when is this proposed to take place? That's a very important question, because timing is of essence. What do you think?
Well, actually, New York is the last state remaining on the Marcel Shale that has yet to make a decision. There was a moratorium which is now expired. So there is no reason New York can't ban hydrofracking. Other states on the East Coast have, like New Jersey and Vermont. So it's ultimately going to be Governor Cuomo's decision to allow or ban hydrofracking. So it's so important that everyone speaks their mind about this, that, you know, we're putting our trust into a system here that isn't even keeping the water clean. So it's so important everyone speaks their mind about this. There's a toll-free phone number, goes to Governor Cuomo's office, and I suggest everyone calls that and says they want to keep our water clean.
Well, I think that you need to give that number so that the governor can hear other people speak and do what they have to do. Why don't you repeat that number for us at least twice, so that people can write it down?
Okay, that phone number is 1-800-566-5020. That's 1-800-566-5020. It's so important to always stay aware and to constantly just speak your mind.
Protecting your water and your air is very, very important, especially for people with asthma, lung disease. And what about the possibility of air being polluted from the waters that could cause lung cancer, because that's part of the environment? It's just not about smoking, it's also about lung cancer. And it's also about breathing in toxicity. I don't know if everybody knows that Storm Sandy, and I have spoken to several scientists about this, not only has it caused havoc materially about homes and places, but the toxins that have become emitted from all the chemicals in each of these houses goes into the atmosphere, stratosphere, jet stream, and causes all kinds of toxicity around the globe. So it's not just about here. So fracking then, from what Christina is talking about, just to clarify that, could mean something toxic that can also add to the toxicity we already have. Now, let me ask you this. Is there any other sources the public can further educate themselves about this issue?
Like I said, I'm not a scientist, I'm an activist. So I suggest the public looks into this more and gets more information for themselves. There is a movie on Netflix by Josh Fox. It's called Gasland, and it's very informative. You got a lot of statistics. And he actually released another movie, Gasland 2. I suggest everyone checks that out.
I believe there's also another movie called Promised Land about having to do with fracking. I do believe Matt Damon was in that movie. It's important for all of us to think in terms of what we need to drink and swallow in order for us to be able to avoid carcinogenic substances in not only water supply, but if the water supply is put into view, how about sprinkler systems onto fruits and vegetables? You have to think in terms of what's healthy for you. You know, years ago, people grew their own vegetables and on their own farms. Well, we don't do that today because we don't have the time. We're too busy on Wall Street. We haven't got the time for that. So we depend on supermarkets and places other than New York State to provide us with grapes, oranges, corn on a cob. You need to know that all of this is supplied by water, and water grows everything. So it's very, very important for us to understand that. Do you want to, it's okay, do you want to leave your phone number on your cell phone in case somebody wants to contact you about learning? If not, can you give the number to Governor Cuomo one more time so that people will know?
Again, it's so important to stay aware and to always speak your mind. So that phone number again is 1-800-566-5020.
Okay, so it appears as though that we've learned a lot. Now, like I said, I never heard the word fracking before I met Christina. And what's important here is that whatever she is saying obviously is backed up by literature and backed up by experiments and research. So this is something that we all need to pay attention to. It's important, possibly, if you wanted to, if this information is on the internet, I'm sure that then you can learn about that as well. So is this information on the computer, internet, or something similar to that?
Definitely, along with the documentary Gasland, which is really awesome. You can find a lot of information on the internet, and I highly recommend that because it's so important to stay aware.
Remember, it is so important to stay aware and have knowledge, because knowledge is power. And if you have the knowledge and you have an understanding of what it is, think about the importance of our food supply and our water supply. It's just always not about economics. It's also about health. So stay healthy, think, stay well, make a call if you feel you want to, and look at that film that Christina suggested, and make up your own mind and see what you want to do. Christina, with all this information, what is your future plan concerning what you have learned?
Well, like I said, I'm an activist, and all the activism that I've done this summer and all the people that I've met, I've learned so much, and it really opened my eyes, and I definitely want to continue learning about what's going on in our world, and I want to continue the activism. So I just hope that this segment helped everyone open their eyes to what's going on.
Isn't it wonderful that we have college students similar to Christina who are, shall we say, fascinated by what they've learned and want to pursue something so that our Earth can become better? Now, don't you think that's a very good idea? College students, open your ears and eyes and listen, because you're living in the same world as she is, and think about all you can learn. Make a phone call. Have a good day. Bye now.